Right.
pronouncing that correct. Okay. Hi, I'm here with John Papa and Paul Leto, and we are going to be discussing Microsoft's Election Guard a little bit. And as you guys introduce yourself, I'm just going to post in the on the Facebook page for anyone else that might be watching that's in the election security activist community that might want to add something to this. I've been reading this article. It was in Mint Press about Election Guard. So anyway, I'll let you guys take it away. Introduce yourselves.
Who do you want to go first?
Oh, okay. John, go ahead.
My name's John Papa. I'm involved in election integrity, election systems, coming up with alternatives that will provide absolute election integrity. I work for Oracle, but that really has no bearing. This is all of my private after-hours activities. But a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Okay. And Paul?
Yeah, my name is Paul Leto. My education is a degree in biology and a law degree. I no longer practice law, but when during the time while I was, during the 2004 election, the way this all got started for me is my brother-in-law and I published a study called Election Irregularities in Snohomish County, Washington. And what we did is there was a hand recount in the governor's race there, which created, and there were also touchscreen voting machines. And this created a natural laboratory and an unprecedented opportunity to test how hand-counted paper ballots performed right next to touchscreen machines in every precinct on the exact same race. And what we found is that there were the usual reports that, hey, you know, when I pressed the touchscreen, it changed my vote to Republican. And about a dozen machines were taken out of service because this problem is so widespread. Now, what we found is that if you looked at the hand-counted paper ballots, like people that did absentee ballots or in-person ballots, those all favored the Democrats, but the touchscreens dramatically favored the Republicans, and the chances of this happening randomly were 1 in many trillions of chances. But furthermore, what we also found is that when we took the machines that were taken out of service because they were observed to have this vote-flipping behavior, and we pooled those as their own precinct, that was by far the best performing Republican precinct in the entire county.
Now,
So
those are the DRE. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, these were DRE.
Okay.
So you take the DREs that were observed to flip votes, and those DREs are the best performing Republicans in the entire county. So either people weren't catching the flip, or even if they corrected it, it didn't record it correctly anyway, right? So this could be, you know, they try to blame this on touchscreen miscalibration, but people that work with touchscreens, including all of us that have smartphones and every cashier in the United States know touchscreens don't miscalibrate this badly, this quickly. You know, these voting machines seem to miscalibrate, quote unquote, every single election. If you look at the reports where people call into the 800 number to report election irregularities, there's always reports that the touchscreens are flipping my vote.
Yeah, there were some in...
You know, even if people catch that error and think they successfully corrected it, that still raises the question of whether it was actually reported correctly. So that lawsuit, or that study, which I've been told is some of the best evidence of election fraud ever discovered, became a lawsuit called Leto v. Sequoia. And on appeal, the appellate court dismissed it because they said we won. And they said it was moot because I had already won. Well, what did I win? We got rid of the DREs. So as far as I know, I'm the only person that's ever successfully gotten rid of electronic voting machines. I don't brag about it too much because they're optical scanners, which have problems of their own. But we did get rid of the touchscreens anyway. I went on to litigate some cases like Busby versus Bilbray in California's congressional district. And in that case, they actually, with hundreds of thousands of uncounted votes, they swore in the Republican and then claimed that California had no jurisdiction to count votes anymore. That was a big case. It ended up being written up by international election monitors as being of great significance to democracy because it raises the issue, among many other issues, of whether Congress, by swearing somebody in, makes a selection rather than the people back in California having an election. In other words, it wasn't about a recount. They didn't even count hundreds of thousands of votes for the first time, and they already, swore in one candidate and then claimed there was no jurisdiction. So that case raised a lot of fundamental questions about what's really going on with our elections when they think they can swear somebody in before their votes are even counted. So I've also written about Bush versus Gore in a book that was edited by Mark Crispin Miller. The chapter was on Bush versus Gore. The title was "A Loser Take All." That thing was briefly, along with many other authors, that was briefly on the New York Times bestseller list a few years back. And I've continued to be involved in elections and thinking and writing everything from encyclopedia articles to blog articles specifically about what does democracy require in elections, because we shouldn't be thinking like, what package feels the best or something like that, but we should be thinking about what exactly does democracy require. And so as we get into it, I'll tell you what democracy needs in a voting system.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for being here. I think that these kind of conversations, I think more people do want to hear this, but we're not getting this in the regular news. And I mean, there's so many great people working in election security activism, and it's just baffling that we can't come up with a solution. This many years, all of you guys have worked so hard in so many different areas with this, and I don't see why we can't put our heads together and come up with solutions. So what I want to get into is that this Microsoft Election Guard, I guess, is being touted as a solution. And it sounds good, but I guess first of all, maybe we could just sort of explain it in as much layman's terms as possible for people that aren't IT experts. What exactly is Election Guard? I don't know if John or anybody want to take a stab at that.
From what I've read in the article that you sent, the Mint article, it's a software development kit. So it's a kit for election vendors. ES&S was one of their supporters to write their code in that they say is somehow going to make it more secure. The article was really focusing on the funding and the supporters and the people that are pushing this forward and their ties into the government, military, and intelligence communities, which is of concern, of course, though they could, produce a quality product just like anybody. But
sure,
really the only really thing it touted with any kind of specific detail was this homomorphic encryption. They basically are claiming that, and it's all electronic voting still, and they say it can be done with a paper ballot via scanner. But so that, again, they're manipulating an electronic vote. But they're saying that they're going to encrypt it, and then this homomorphic encryption will allow them to tally all the ballots in the encrypted form, producing an encrypted sum, the same way you would do it if it weren't encrypted. But again, this doesn't close the vectors of compromise that are obvious in this central tabulation type situation with no real tie back to the original voter intent.
Mm-hmm. So it says, the article states that this election guard it's set to be adopted by half of voting machine manufacturers and some state governments for the 2020 general. And it also says it will enable end-to-end verification of elections. open results to third-party organizations for secure validation. I'm really curious about that one. How exactly will that happen? And allow individual voters to confirm their votes were correctly counted. So that all sounds great, but I'm just wondering, how exactly is that going to work?
Well, right, they haven't presented any details about how this is going to work. I mean, if I, as a voter, have the ability to, after I cast my ballot, access that ballot somehow and verify that the votes that the selections that I made are still present, that doesn't secure the tabulation. It's like it's like a false warm fuzzy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can look at the ballot and I can look at the way I voted. Great. That still doesn't mean that it's been tabulated correctly. So, and what I see in an electronic system might not be could easily be masking what's really being presented. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a false picture. It's showing me my ballot, but how do I really know that my votes, my selections on that ballot were tabulated correctly? And how are they going to guarantee that that tabulation is taking place across all voters?
Right. And how exactly, so, excuse me, I met a candidate recently who took his election fraud fight to the Supreme Court. And he said, systems crashed, their own kind of internal numbers didn't match what was the official tally. But he was saying, the best thing to do would be to have a separate way to tally votes, like basically in tandem with the other system. So basically, that's what this sounds like it's saying, opening results to third-party organizations, so you could somehow tally it. Another organization could tally it themselves, but it's just all very unclear. So,
yeah, no details have been released. It's like a sales brochure, lots of promises, but no details. And what we really need are the details.
Well, right. And I think one of the most shocking things, when I first got into learning about election integrity and security, was that these are private companies, they're voting machine manufacturers, and it's proprietary software, so they couldn't basically let people look at how everything was done. And so as you always say, John, if you have a trusted insider, how is that? It's the opposite of transparency. So how can we place our trust in these voting machine manufacturers when it's done behind the scenes? So
no, you can't.
Right,
Don't trust anybody, and you shouldn't have to. And
right.
A voting vendor, it's really kind of an illusion. They say, "Oh, it's open source." Well, sure, this software development kit that they're offering is open source, but that doesn't mean when ES&S utilizes this software, makes their own proprietary software, they can't be subpoenaed. This again is closed. We have to trust that ES&S or whoever happens to do it. I don't mean to pick on them. It could be Diebold, it could be anyone.
Right.
We're again forced to trust them, and this is where we want to get away from. Mm-hmm. I don't want to have to trust anybody else, and I want to be able to look at the entire food chain when I cast my vote. Not only the software development kit, but the software that was developed with that kit, and the manners that it's counting the selections on my ballot.
Mm-hmm. So, Paul, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that trust is really the core issue. The election officials and the vendors keep asking for trust, when not only do they not deserve trust, nobody can be trusted. I can't be trusted. You can't be trusted. We all make choices on the ballots, and we have horses in the race. Even if we're a non-voter, we can't be trusted because the election results affect our tax policies. They affect our lives. So nobody can be trusted. And that's the fundamental error around which, the current system's been designed. It's been designed to trust insiders. Now, let me just say how crazy that is. When we have sweepstakes, they always have disclosed that no employees of the sweepstakes sponsoring organization is allowed to win the sweepstakes. Why? It's not only against the law, it would appear very, very corrupt. Well, when it comes to the government, they run the elections that replace themselves or purport to replace themselves. And guess what? 98% of the time, employees win. They're called incumbents, okay?
Mhm.
So it's very suspicious when you have a Congress with a 15% approval rating, a 98% re-election rating. So you can't trust. But what we can do is you can build a system based on distrust that actually creates trustable results. And the classic example of that is paper ballots, hand marked and hand counted in the precincts. You post the election results from each precinct publicly, and then they phone them in. So then that way, anybody that wants to check the tabulation can go around to all the precincts, get the data from each precinct, and add it up for themselves and double check it.
Mhm.
That is, a simple system, but it's very sophisticated, and it really tends to isolate the errors into individual precincts. So in the worst case scenario, if you have one precinct, Democrats, Republicans, all get together and fix the election results, they can't change very many ballots. But with computerized election results, one change can change 100 votes or it could change 1 million votes. It's all the same.
Right. So
So
it
that's
seems
why the hand counted paper.
right. It
That-
seems that say you were involved. You mentioned Bush v. Gore. Okay, so if we go back to that and the hanging chads and all that happened, I mean, this is kind of when the shift and everything changed over to the electronic voting machines. What it seems to me is, I mean, this is big money. These voting machine vendors, they're making a lot of money off of this. It sounds to me from what like John Papa's the system you came up with and what everyone seems to agree with these paper ballots is, wouldn't it also save a ton of money? I mean, it's like, what is it? I forget the amount right now, but that is being spent. The HAVA Act. I mean
Right.
there's money, and wherever there's money involved, there's usually corruption. So it seems like that would be a good selling point for a safer system is they would save a lot of money.
Well, the government, I mean,
Yeah, they
we're
would.
talking about- what is bigger money than government? I mean, the people that are being elected. This is the most fundamental right in our democracy is our ability to cast our vote, to participate in these elections. And all this is really taking away from that.
So, Paul, what do you see as or steps to the solution? If you've been in this a long time, how do we tackle that? First of all, the fact that the voting machine vendors are in this. Do we just, like you said, John, we encourage anyone can build a secure system, but I mean, what's the solution with all of that?
Well, I think the solution is that, first of all, you have to get some clarity with everybody. And I think this is relatively easy to do on what's most important when you're designing a voting system. And what's most important is, for example, the ability to change our political leaders when they're corrupt. So if you keep that in mind and keep in mind that government runs the elections, you need to have a voting system that will work without corrupt, and even when the people running it are corrupt. Because if you don't have that, then when you need your right to vote the very most in order to kick criminals out of office, you don't have your right to vote at all.
Mm-hmm.
So if you use that test, then you start thinking in terms of the values of democracy. Where people will fall off the road or fall off the wagon is that they start thinking in terms of values that really are not the values of democracy. For example, efficiency is not always a value of democracy. For example, we have checks and balances, right? If we just wanted efficiency, we wouldn't have one branch of government, working against another branch of government. We would just have a dictator, right? So sometimes when people are thinking in terms of efficiency, they think, oh, look how fast these election results can all be tabulated using this system. And they get sold, based on those kinds of ideas. They're not really thinking in terms of the requirements that democracy has for a voting system. What democracy needs is the ability to kick crooked incumbents out of office in a guaranteed way. It needs to be able to create evidence of anything that goes wrong. Those are the two basic things. And also, of course, recording and tabulating the ballots in an indelible way so that they can't be changed. So those are the basic three requirements. But if you look at the electronic systems that are out there, they fail all of those requirements. Well, the solution is we got to start thinking in terms of what democracy needs and freedom needs, rather than what businesses need or what news organizations need for quick results or something like that.
But we're just kind of going in circles because we can't get different people elected because as you said, it's the insiders running the election. So how do we break out of this vicious cycle? What's the answer?
Well, we have to secure the election so that we can elect officials that will be representing our interests. So we need a guarantee. We need absolute election integrity. Paul mentioned doing the counts at the precinct. This was, again, part of the methodology that we proposed, where we compartmentalize. I suggest compartmentalizing down to the polling place myself, but compartmentalizing at the precinct is fine. I think everyone that I've ever talked to along the subject of election integrity talks about a paper ballot, a voter-marked paper ballot. Whether that's marked with a ballot marking device or with a pen is really irrelevant. And these things should be,
except for the cost.
Well, some handicapped people might need a ballot marking device.
Right.
But again, this ballot marking device should be completely separate from the device that interprets the ballot. Right? A ballot marking device, it should just basically be a glorified printer. All it's doing is marking a ballot. It shouldn't be checking things or doing tying. It shouldn't be related to the tabulation or anything. Again, and that's why in the methodology that we've proposed, we separate these two things. But first and foremost is a paper ballot marked by the voter. And then after that, I believe in wrapping that paper ballot in some technology to build in those safeguards, those like an immutable ballot image. Right? Now I've got a paper ballot and I've got an image that can't be changed of that ballot, secured in a way. I also, like I've been proposing, the cast vote record. When the voter verifies that they've marked their ballot in such a way, and this interpretation, electronically or whatever, of their ballot's been performed, I want that voter verified approval to be secured at the moment that the voter says, yes, this is how I voted, so that we don't have to trust somebody down the line, downstream, to interpret what the voter's intent was. But the voter's intent is clear. They marked their ballot. Nobody should be looking or deciding or waiting out.
Right. So, but to bring this change, I mean, one of the things I do, and this is posting to the candidates with the contract page, which is an anti-corruption contract. We have a lot of great grassroots candidates that, if you listen to them on the issues, they're pretty much all on the same page across the country. I think that change is desired, but they're up against incumbents. Excuse me, and they're up against these machines. How can these candidates sort of band together? What actions would you guys recommend that they can take to, if that's my thinking is maybe putting pressure individually on their board of elections, going in. I went to a meeting in North Carolina where they were deciding, which company to go with. I guess that would be one way, is to have candidates get their supporters involved in putting the pressure on, because behind these machines are the people that work that we've elected at Board of Elections that are making the decisions. But I think it seems as though that's been happening kind of in the dark without people paying a lot of attention for a long time. And if there's more awareness of how all of that works, maybe that's a start, but they're up against, seems like insurmountable odds. to,
Well, it's
Yeah.
not going to get fixed from the top down,
no.
right? It's
Right.
got to get fixed by pressure from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
And really, we don't need to what we need to do is just define the specification.
Mm-hmm.
This is how we want the election to run. The vendors, ES&S, Diebold, whoever, they should be able to build their systems. Whoever builds the best mousetrap to the specification, great.
Right.
But it has to have these guarantees in it.
Mm-hmm.
One of those is that I should be able to rerun the election over and over and over again and get the exact same result. And I should be able to do it in an efficient and timely manner. I shouldn't wait weeks to gather up things. I should be able to, in the same time as the polling period, rerun what happened in that polling place or in that precinct or in that state, that county, wherever, at any degree of granularity. And I need to do it in a timely manner. We also need real-time results. When the polling period closes, we need the results. The more time that passes between the polling period closing and the preliminary results being released or the election results, these are opportunities and they're vectors of compromise. So we need to close that gap down so that when that polling period closes, I pretty much know how that polling place, what their results are. And these things need to be publicly available. The moment the polling period closes, those electronic images, they should all be in a public place where, with all the tools necessary to data mine whatever they need to do, if they need to look at that precinct, that polling place, that county, that state, all the way up to the national election. We need to be able to do this over and over again until we're absolutely sure that the results are accurate.
So,
without any degree, no variables of, no percentages of it has to be exact.
Right.
Is my whole thing.
like banking, like you said. So
yeah, just like counting money.
Paul, you've been in this for quite a while in this work. I mean, what do you? Like I said, there's so many great minds in trying to change this, and it seems like we're going to get to 2020, and it's not going to be any better. We're still, what would you suggest as far as, like, I don't know, getting activists to work together on the same page with this stuff? I mean, those are the solutions I'm interested in. A lot of people are trying to work together, but it's still very disjointed, and I don't see a clear path forward to fixing the problem. What do you?
Right. Well, right now, I think that we just need to focus on what it is that democracy needs. And specifically, I mean, the current system isn't going to change by 2020. And that leaves us with a real big problem. And that problem is this. Election results are inherently dubious, no matter what jurisdiction they come from. Literally, there's not a single living human being that knows that any of those election results are correct. Right. And how is that even acceptable? It's not acceptable. So basically, we need to call bullshit on the system and say, look, this is giving us dubious election results. They like to turn it around and say, oh, but claims of fraud are dubious. You don't have the evidence for that. Well, they hide all the evidence, or they make sure that it's not available. Right. But more importantly, they can't prove that the numbers that they're certifying under penalty of perjury are correct. They have no idea they're actually correct, but they certify them nonetheless. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the inherent problem that we have right now. And as soon as people understand how big that problem is, it'll build the demand for the actual solution.
Mm-hmm.
Completely agree. Yes.
I mean, I saw one race up close and personal in Florida, and at the time, the suggestions from the election integrity community was to have the candidates request ballot images. Well, I saw how that process went, and it was like the Board of Elections there took, I don't know, I think 8 weeks or something to even respond and get what the candidate was asking, and so it's just all it's not transparent at all. So yeah, I don't, it's disheartening.
I think there's another important element here, and it gets to Bush versus Gore, which everybody knows about that case. But what that really means is Bush versus Gore literally shut down the recount in Florida. They ordered that the recount must stop They said, we don't have enough time for this, and this might impair the apparent victory of Mr. Bush, as Scalia put it. Well, yeah, if the recount changes the result, it's supposed to impair an apparent victory. But that didn't stop the Supreme Court from stopping that recount. And then again, in 2016, with Trump, the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, sued for recounts in various states. Those recounts were all shut down. So legally, it should be really obvious to people that recounts are going, in the presidential level at least, they're going to be, and they have been, and they always are, shut down. So you have to get the result right on election night. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the rhyming phrase that I think Brad Friedman at Brad Blog likes to use. You got to get it right on election night, because the legal situation is such that it's all getting shut down afterwards. And that goes for audits too. Recounts are really just form of an audit, limited. A lot of people think recounts are some sort of magic bullet, but if you stuff the ballot box, you can recount that ballot box as many times as you want, and you will not be wiser, right?
Right.
And ballot images as well, and you can recount those extra ballot images as many times as you want, and you will never be the wiser.
Right.
So people need to realize that anything that happens after the election, because of the legal situation right now, we can't rely on.
Mm-hmm. So would you agree that the pressure needs to be put on, like, locally? I mean, is that, or the secretaries of state? I mean, how do we bring this change? Where's the pressure most effectively?
Because of federalism, in the federal constitution, elections are run by states. The federal government does not have a single person who counts ballots or anything like that. They fund machines through HAVA and things like that, but it's really states that run the election. So this basically can be fought on a state-by-state basis. We can find one state and try to get them to switch over to a system that actually works, and then use that as a model for other states to follow.
Well, then, what are your thoughts on elections being made part of critical infrastructure? I mean, that gets into, like, should it be all federal, the same, or should each state be able to do things their own way? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, right now, if you try to actually investigate an election, that's another way of doing that is banging your head against the wall because of all the non-transparency, and they don't want to give you the data and stuff like that. So, and you run into claims of trade secrecy. They don't want to disclose this information because it's claimed to be a trade secret. Well, it's just going to make that problem worse if you make it a national secret because it's critical infrastructure, or because this is a national security thing. The whole thing about the Russians being a threat. Sure, any foreigner, everybody in the world has an interest in the U.S. elections, but the interest that we as American voters or the insiders have is even greater than the interest that the Russians have. So if we're just protecting ourselves against Russian hackers, we're not protecting ourselves. We got to protect ourselves against the insiders too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would support it being a critical infrastructure and recognized at the national level, but with the caveat that the states have to run their election. So if the nation can provide, like we've suggested, a USA intranet that cuts off all access to the rest of the world and run it like a ComSec network, where every network, every node of the network is known. Because I do believe that this is a critical national interest, our election systems, but at the same time, we can't take it away from the states. The way it has to be is the states have to run their elections. So the federal government should be providing an umbrella that secures the states' activity in running their elections.
Yeah, when you listen to the some of these hearings, it just sounds like a lot of money being thrown around to me. But would you say there's a state that is doing things better than others? You said maybe, have one state really change things and be kind of a model. Which state do you think is ahead of the curve?
I can't think of any good examples myself. I mean, I probably differ a little from John in that I think that ultimately we can't have a technologized system that's actually going to do the job that we want it to do, because the more complex it is, the easier it is to hide mistakes or to hide fraud. And regardless of whether they're mistakes or fraud, it's all the same, because if the result of the election is reported incorrectly, in a sense, it doesn't matter whether that was due to a mistake or due to fraud. That the harm to democracy is exactly the same.
Right.
Agreed.
Right. So,
Another thing is that you really can't have a meaningful audit in elections, and here's why. My dad worked for the Internal Revenue Service. He did auditing for 32 years. In audits is where you take a number that's tabulated, like a number from your tax return, and you say, hey, give me the receipts, the original receipts that show that you're entitled to those deductions. So you go back to the original source of the information and you verify the original source. You can't do that with elections because of ballot secrecy. You can't, once the ballot is cast, it's not allowed to have, and it's not supposed to have, the voter's name on the ballot. So you can't go back to the voter and say, did you really mean to vote for 3 people for president like thousands of people allegedly did in Florida in 2000? You can't do that. So probably what happened in most of those cases was somebody got access to the ballot and deliberately overvoted that ballot by filling in, 1 or 2 more ovals for presidential candidates, which has the effect of canceling that ballot. So that's one of the forms of fraud that insiders can engage in, is deliberately overvoting ballots before they're counted. So basically, though, whenever you hear the word audit, or whenever I hear the word audit, I'm thinking this is not an audit in the true sense of the word, because you can't go back to the voter and verify that the ballot is what it was supposed to be.
So,
Well,
isn't there some way around that? Some traceable thing that doesn't I publicly identify the voter, but some way.
No, we don't need to identify the voter. We just need to secure their cast vote record. The voter needs to approve the interpretation of their cast vote, what they cast.
Right.
And that once that's secured with, let's say, the immutable image of that ballot, now we don't need to go back to the voter, or we in fact are going back to the voter when we look at their cast vote record. So we need to secure that, and that's what I've been saying, is at the time that the voter validates and approves their ballot and they cast it, that cast vote record has to be captured, because that's the voter's intent. That way, just like what Paul mentioned, we aren't going to get these triple votes or overstrikes or anything like that afterwards, because we'll always have the paper ballot, an image of that ballot, and an encoded cast vote record that the voter themselves verified and was sealed and can't be changed once that ballot's cast. That's why, Paul, I would love to present to you the methodology in a future time that I've shared with Kelly and others, because I think you'll find it closing these holes, because you're speaking to the vulnerabilities and the vectors of attack against our elections. And what we're trying to do is to close down those things. And I agree with you that the more technology that's involved can be cumbersome and make it overly complicated so that fraud can be perpetrated. But at the same time, I would suggest that we can use technology in a very simple way to speed the efficiency and the logistics of handling the number of paper ballots in a very large populated area, to do it in an efficient and timely manner. And when I talk about audits, I talk about doing the exact same thing we did to count the votes at the time when the election results were confirmed, that those should always match. And also, I believe in building into the system. So you mentioned that we need to verify the election at the time as quick as possible, because we only get one shot at it. And that's why I believe in building self-policing mechanisms into the specification, into how we're going to vote. I think right now we're voting with like I think the idea was convenience, personally, because it obviously isn't security was the overriding directive of elections. It appears that how convenient it is to elect or how easy it is to touch a screen. But those things, like you've mentioned, build in all sorts of vulnerabilities. So again, we need to get back to a paper ballot, and we need to have a manner that secures that paper ballot and the voter's intent when they cast that ballot. And then we need to be able to tabulate that ballot and all the ballots in a timely and efficient manner to close that gap, the time between the polling place closing and the election results being revealed. We need to make that real time.
Yeah, I just think until we get to the root cause, and these machines, I mean, it just seems like there's so much work and effort that I don't want to say it's wasted. Everyone's doing great work in their own way that's in the election security community. But if everyone would get on board with one system that made sense, that was paper ballots, like the system that you created, John, then it seems like, and it was all, everyone's on the same page, that we might actually get somewhere in changing things. But that just seems very hard to do. Everyone's kind of down in the weeds in their own, area of expertise with it, which is good. But it seems like we need more, consensus among everyone about what the real solution is. And it seems like your system that's paper ballots, counting at the precinct, and kind of taking that trusted insider, trusting the machines away, that if everyone would get on the same page with that, we could actually get somewhere. So how do we do that?
Well, that's why we took it up to a higher level. I mean,
yeah.
When we first started in 2016, we were looking at the specific machine and how the machine would operate. Mm-hmm. But you're right, there were so many competing angles and biases coming into it that we had to take it a step up. Mm-hmm. That's why we're looking at just the method and how we perform an election. And we don't want to change it too much. Right? We want the voter to do pretty much the same thing they're doing now, right? Mm-hmm. Keep marking a ballot and casting it. The only thing we want to do is, in those actions, we want to build in the safeguards so that after that, nothing can be changed. And like you said, we don't have to trust anybody. No trusted insiders. I don't have to trust a machine. I don't have to trust a person. It's just self-policing, and it has to be publicly owned. Now, vendors should be able to build to the specification, and whatever vendor can build the nicest or the most efficient way to the specification, cost effective or whatever, great. Mm-hmm. Let them make their money. That's their business. But we shouldn't be just saying, hey, go build a voting machine with no guidance whatsoever, because that's what we get now are all these different antiquated systems.
Right, or you have all these different machines in different places, and so it's just to understand how each of them work and how it just seems like a lot of effort is being spent on dealing with each different machine, and how do you tackle this, and if everyone would get on the same page, then we could get somewhere.
Well, you're absolutely correct. Standardization would be just a godsend in this situation, because right now, if you find a vulnerability in one vendor's specific release of one machine, that doesn't mean that you can close that vulnerability in all places if it exists or where it does exist. And that's part of the problem I think we've built in, or it's come to the point where there's so many different machines and methods and releases and mannerisms of voting that we've built in insecurity, and we've built in the vulnerabilities, and we've built in an inability to correct these things in an efficient manner. Mm-hmm. I mean, any software deployment will tell you standardization is the key to efficiency, really.
So have you, Paul, if I didn't, I'll send it to you, or you two could talk separately. I meant to send you John's, his system, the methodology, the write-up. Did I send that on to you yet? I guess I
I'm not, yeah, I don't think so.
Okay.
I'd be
Well,
happy to take a look at it though.
yeah, I mean,
And
I'm
I-
thinking if maybe if it would could start with candidates getting on board with, talking about one system, using this one system, and then maybe that's a way to start. But have you?
Really, it's a method.
Right,
because-
right.
And because when we talk
As
systems,
you said,
people-
anybody can build it, but it would just be to those specifications. So,
and we
Yeah.
want to build in these things like Paul's been talking about that are the checkstones, the checkpoints that are going to keep this thing,
mhm.
that's going to build in integrity. Right?
Well, here's the way I've approached this. I wrote up something called the Roll Call for Democracy, and I wrote up what I thought democracy required, which is largely what I've talked about today. I wrote that up in the form of a resolution, and then I found that basically everybody agrees with it. I had organizations sign on from Kiwanis clubs, Democratic clubs, Republican clubs, literally, the Socialist Party of the USA, NAACP. They all voted in favor of it because nobody's really going to be opposed to what democracy truly needs. So basically, it's like putting out something for bid. You come up with your specs, and these would be the democracy specs, if you will. You write that out, you vet it, make sure that it's really tight and it really contains everything that democracy needs. And then you say, this is what we need in a voting system. And everybody will agree with it because if they don't, they're against democracy. If you've written that roll call for democracy correctly, which I think I did, then to oppose it is to identify yourself as being anti-democracy, and nobody's going to want to do that. So the way you get it is not by talking to election officials. They're the only people that give me a hard time because they're invested in the system. The community that sometimes gives me a hard time is election activists. And why would they be a difficult community? They're a difficult community because of the way human beings operate. Once you commit to something, studies show that even when you're confronted with facts that justify a change in your position, the chance of the person changing the position is only about 20%.
Right.
So election activists have already committed to something. They don't want to embarrass themselves by, switching gears and changing their mind. They will eventually, but it's harder. But if you just go to an average citizen with something like the roll call for democracy and explain it to them, you got no problem. They agree with it wholeheartedly, and they see it as being very important. So I think that's what we do is create a series of specs, call it for roll call for democracy if you want, and then I'll get everybody to come on board.
That sounds amazing. We'll
Yeah.
get right on
Yeah.
it. I mean, really.
He's defining the specification of
Yeah.
an election. And that's perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert on all these machines. I still find it confusing as much as I've read, as much as I've tried to learn, but we need to simplify that. That's okay. So you wrote up, where can I find this? That you wrote what you were talking about before that all these people signed up.
Yeah, I'll send it to you by email. I got it on my email. I can send it to you.
That'd be great.
But we can use that as a first draft. Even though people have already approved it, we can just use it as a first draft and let John take a look at it and see if he has anything to add or subtract. But basically, because as long as we're really committed, saying this is what democracy really needs, we're in a really strong position. As long as we just spec that out and nothing more, we'll be in a very, very strong position.
Nice.
Right. But
I'd love to look at it.
But the problem with changing the machines again is that there's so much money involved in this. How do we tackle that?
Well, how much money is involved?
Well, we just
I'm sorry.
how many people died in the name of democracy? Money's not really that big of a concern when you consider what's really at stake is democracy itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think that sounds like somewhere to start from. And that's what I'm looking for, solutions and things that, this is something I can share with candidates that care about democracy and get them on board, and maybe get their supporters on board. So I think
Public support.
yeah.
And
Oh, I think you froze for a sec there, Paul. Say again?
Yeah, I think that, I do believe that that's the way to go. And we can initially shop it around to some key organizations and get them to kind of, to sign on, and then go to candidates and say, look, we got a lot of organizations that believe this is the way to go. Do you want to get on this bandwagon? And I think they will, because it just gives you something to talk about. That's a great talking point that nobody can really disagree with.
Right, exactly. Okay, well, that sounds like a great place to start, and I hope you two will talk, and I'll send on John's election methodology to you, Paul, and yeah.
And it goes way beyond the voting machine and the specification there. We know our voter registration systems have been compromised, contain invalid data. We need a national registration drive that sets up a parallel system, one so we can compare and cut over to, but we need to, whenever there's a corruption in the database, you either roll back to the last known good point or you have to repopulate. And I believe, in my experience, we're at the point where we need to repopulate all voter registration databases.
Yeah, I look at specific North Dakota where there is no voter registration. So that's one thing that I think needs to be thought through, about whether, when we have real ID coming up and everybody's going to have one of those, whether voter registration is entirely redundant at that point.
Oh, yeah. If you can identify the voter, the only purpose voter registration does is to identify the voter, who's a valid voter. If you can do that without a voter registration system through a voter ID or some kind of voting voucher or what have you, that's great. Because linking to the voter is the controlling the distribution of ballots. Another thing that I think is essential is not having or serializing so that we control in a stricter manner the ballots that are being distributed to the voters. So yeah, great. If you can eliminate the voter registration databases by having voter identification or some other mechanism that identifies the voter at the polling place or in any manner like that, great. Even better. The less moving parts, the better, in my opinion.
Well, maybe we will have more election integrity activists come on board with this idea too, I'm sure. If it pick up some steam among regular people, I think, so many people just don't even bother to vote, and this might be something that they would respond to, hopefully. So, okay, well, Paul, please do send me that. I'm interested in reading what you wrote before and how we can, use that to come up with real solutions. It just, the more we talk about it and more people are aware, definitely election integrity and security is on people's minds, but there's just still so much misunderstanding about it and what the answers are to fix it just seem to elude us. I don't know. So I thank you both for coming on, and we'll see what we can do to move forward with that.
It's a pleasure. Nice meeting you, Paul.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Nice meeting you, John.
All right, good night.
All right, goodbye.
Thank you, Kelly.
All right, see you soon.